Welcome back to Great Northern Cascade Division in N-Scale. My name's Ian. In this video you might notice that there is a train sitting behind me on the middle deck, and if you're really observant you also might notice that the lower deck has some stuff going on too. So this video kind of started out wanting to just expand a little bit east of Skykomish and start to put some skyboards up. In the last video I was tidying things up and running the skyboards around on the other side of the layout. Kind of got to Skykomish and it's like, well, I kind of ran out of space now. So in this one I wanted to kind of run down the rest of the way and try and get over to the top of this helix so that I will be able to start figuring out how I was going to be able to get the gradient right and the distance between the decks. And I was like, well, I really kind of need to figure out the approach that comes westbound from Leavenworth. So that's functionally what we're going to go over in this video. I don't have track down on the lower level. I do on the middle deck though, all the way to the top of the helix. That's why I've got a little bit of a train parked up behind me. And on the lower deck, I just have all this approach stuff done. We climb about 1.5% over the course of almost 25 feet to get to Leavenworth. So I don't have Leavenworth in place. There's no track on the lower level, nothing wired up on that lower level. But it does mean that now, right around here, we can start to build that final helix that will get us between the middle deck and the lower deck. So this video does kind of jump around a little bit. Again, I'm kind of doing this in short bursts when I can, an hour, 2 hours or so at the most. And so all of a sudden you go from, hey, I'm going to be putting up skyboards to, hey, I've got all this work done. So I just wanted to kind of share what I was up to. Hopefully you enjoy this one. Please do like, subscribe, and follow along so you can see progress. And hopefully we'll be back again soon when I get a start on this helix. So I have all of the roadbed and sub-roadbed in place now, bringing us to the end of the middle deck. So switched out and brought a fairly shortened western start through into Skykomish. Previously the sub-roadbed pink foam ended here, and so I have extended this down. Maybe it's cut in a little bit too close here, but I'm going to have some running along, a little bit of the Skykomish River poking through just to the east of Skykomish. Somewhat loosely modeled on the prototype, it does run alongside the river. This side where I'm standing of the river is the Skykomish ballpark and campground, so camped there a number of times with the kids, went down and fished and watched the trains kind of go back and forth through the trees. Just to the east you'll continue through, and this is where we start to deviate away from the prototype a little bit. Cut out a bunch of the bench work here, and there'll be some, I've talked about some kind of trestle bridge, curved trestle bridge will go in here. Roughly head at level is the Foss River Bridge, although it's not really going to be the Foss River Bridge, but that's what it's going to be roughly modeled on. We're really compressing things down in terms of how close we are to Skykomish, but that's just the reality of model railroads. So cut it out, and what will end up happening is it'll dip down a little bit here. The skyboard will also come a lot lower than the level of the benchwork, probably by a good 4 to 6 inches or so. We have plenty of space. We have, I think, 16 inches of vertical clearance here because most of that lower deck is going to be brought forward, probably is a good 8 inches or so. So there's plenty of room to play with here, and so even with kind of cutting in as it would drop away for the trestle to go through, we're not going to impede that lower level too much. Probably won't end up putting in that skyboard right away because I do need to get to some of the wiring that all drops down behind that, and so I am just thinking through, that is where all of the wiring had to come down. I did think through other places where I could have put this. There was no really good place on the layout to have it centrally accessible. So I think that's also one of the reasons by bringing it forward, if I need to, I can still get behind and think thin, breathe in, and I could get through and still do stuff. But that's where trestle's going to be anyway. And then here we slowly started to descend. Originally I had planned on it being dropping down more than it is, so that basically by the time we got to the end of the middle deck we were pretty much down at the height of that deck. But it was going to be too much of a slope when I then kind of thought about it more and looked about it more, because you're still climbing here to get up to that west portal of the Cascade Tunnel. I'm doing it in model form, and so just because of how it worked, there was no way that everything could be climbing in the right places where it should have been, unless I made this helix high that it needed to be, and then you start to drop down and Yeah, okay, I could have done that, but the whole point was to take time out from being in the helix. So I ended up dropping it to about a 1% grid. So as you come off the trestle bridge, you have a little bit of a level section. You start to drop down about a 1% grade, 1.25%, 1.5% by the time you get to the end here. So if you look at it, you can just about see that there's a grade. I really don't know how well it's going to come across on camera. Hopefully not very well, because that's kind of the whole point. It is a very shallow grade, but from the trestle bridge, by the time you get down to here, you have dropped about 1 3/4 of an inch. I think is what it ended up coming to over the course of about 14 feet, something like that. And conveniently, math works out. I did plan this. 1 3/4 inches is basically one entire turn of a helix. So that's kind of what the goal was here, was try and take out at least one turn from the helix, and then we're going to have the same here. This road bed is raised up, that section of the road bed is raised up, our benchwork rather is raised up, and so the goal here is that we'll take out another turn of the helix, probably is by the time we climb. Well, you'd be descending, or if you're going westbound, you're climbing, and take out at least another turn of the helix. So I think this still ends up about 3.5 turns of the helix. I think we're still going to be at right around 10.5, 10 3/4 inches, which is what the other helix was. We are on a much broader radius here. Yeah, so maybe they can have a little bit of a shallower climb, which is kind of what I was hoping for. I was wanting for more like 1 3/4% grade, 2% grade, rather than the 2.5% grade we ended up at the top on the other side of the helix. So I'm hoping that this all works out. I at least have the approach done. I can start putting track down, can start putting up skyboards, and then I think what I would need to do is then also work on the approach coming in, just to make sure that that math will work in terms of, okay, where am I actually going to be starting this helix? It's not going to be flat down on the benchwork. I need to figure out how far up I'm coming, because the helix would end up starting here, so 1 rotation, 2 rotation, 3 rotation, half the rotation should take me back. I need to cut a little bit, I think, but I didn't want to go too far. So that's kind of where the bulk of the progress has been over the last week or two. Just slowly working at parts of it. I'm going to try and get track down now, and then move on to the skyboards, and then pretty much most of that middle deck will be done, and we'll be able to run trains all the way down to where the top of the helix is going to be. So we are now eastbound out of Skykomish, just a short little kind of fictional passenger train made up here, coming along where the Skykomish River is going to cut in. And yeah, I think that I came a little bit too close in how I had cut back in for the river. So that's okay, we can fix that once it comes to scenery. Otherwise, this track was pretty straightforward. Wasn't a whole lot to it. Once you get through that east switch that and the middle cars are going through, it's pretty much all just single track running. I did think about making that siding in Skykomish long enough for the entire Empire builder to pull into, but I felt like it would have kind of been a bit of a waste of space. So it's about 9 feet long. So maybe it would come in 4 locos, 12 cars, maybe would squeeze in there. Otherwise it seemed a little bit of a waste. So this is coming over where that trestle bridge will go into, very loosely modeled off what would be the Foss River Bridge. And this here is, I think it was 18 or 19 inch radius, so a little bit tight maybe compared to the others. It's really not tight for N scale. A little bit tight, but again, it was just to make sure that I wasn't impeding too much on all the wiring back there. I kind of wanted to be over to the front, and then once we come over here, the loco is just slowly starting to go down that 1% grade to make it over to the top of the helix. In the prototype you would still be climbing, but again, it's very, very slight grade. You can't really tell looking at it. It's probably not coming across on camera. And I don't know if I'd said on the previous video, but along here there are going to be some snow sheds. Maybe even bring the snow sheds around this curve here, because there would have been a bunch of those as you would make your way up towards the Cascade Tunnel. Maybe it's not as much by the 50s and 60s, but I think there would have still been some around. Onto a 24-inch radius curve here, so this is kind of much more normal. Most of the curves on the layout are more like 22, 24, 26 inches, so 24-inch radius curve. And now here we're starting to drop down to about 1.25%, and then by the end the loco's probably just about coming on to where it starts to drop down to about 1.5%. But by here, not that big of a deal, because right around here probably is where the locos are going to disappear into the Cascade Tunnel itself. It's bringing to a stop. So happy with how this short little section of track works out, about 2.5 minutes or so, assuming you already parked up on that E-switch in Skykomish. Probably is going to leave Skykomish as it is, although I'm tempted to put in some more. There'll be about 4 tracks, probably 3 or 4 tracks that will end up in Skykomish, and a little bit of a facility where you could have been able to pull over if you're going to run some of the electrics that would have pulled locos through. I'm kind of right on the edge of where I could have those electrics going through the tunnels instead, so we'll see. I might throw in a number 7 switch on either side and then have that second siding going through, just so that I would have somewhere to park trains, at least for now. But I think next step is probably going to be get the rest of the skyboards up, leaving that section, but get the rest of the skyboards up, because I kind of stopped on that west side of Skykomish, and then I can finish patching those up, let that dry, and then get all of that middle deck painted, and that will be in a pretty good spot, bringing us to the end of this middle deck, the top of where the helix is going to be, and then figure out that lower deck approach to make sure that the helix is going to start out in the right place. So I did go ahead and get skyboards up. I did also go ahead and patch as well, cam down, and had a little bit of a gap here, which is kind of what I said I was going to leave open, just to make sure until I figure out exactly what's going to be happening in here. And I've got a few more wires that I want to pull through, just to make sure that I've got some extra for DCC bus. And then swing around and bring it onto the wall, and then again kind of left it because I'm not entirely sure how far down I'm going to come here. On the upper deck I go all the way to the end, but somewhere I think I'm just going to disappear behind the mountain, so kind of left it there. Joy of ADHD kicking in is then I also did approach all the way on the lower deck to pink foam where Leavenworth is going to be. So that's as far as I got. Had to clear everything, shuffle a bunch of materials down, stuff over on the other side. And I was not planning on doing this, but once I got started, I got started. So come out of Leavenworth. Leavenworth is going to be on the 2-inch pink foam. Leavenworth going around the end of the peninsula. Now on the far side, Wenatchee Yard. So Leavenworth, going to have a couple of small industries, passenger station, not a whole lot in Leavenworth, but once we get onto the plywood section, we start a gradual come up to a 1% and then 1.5% grade. We basically climb up 1.5% all the way around 24-inch radius curve, keep climbing 1.5%, another 24-inch radius curve, keep climbing 1.5%, and we end up on this deck here, and this is where the helix is going to be. So if we come down, we're just keeping on that slight grade, and so helix base will come in here, and so we're going to have basically 48-inch square, and then the helix itself will probably end up more like 23-inch radius, 23-inch radius, to give myself a little bit of a room on the edges. And so you'll functionally enter the helix here, so you can do your rotations, and then come out on the far side over there. So just kind of brought that in because I think kind of like on the other side, what we'll end up with is we'll come out here, we'll kind of curve into a straight section, and then we can start to pull away. 1.5% grade is fairly gentle, but it means that, we pick up well, I'm trying to do some math. We pick up over 3 inches, or right around 3 inches, 3¼ inches over that 20-some feet of approach, 22, 24 feet of approach, something like that. Yeah, so we pick up a little over 3 inches as we go around and do all of that. And so again, in terms of helix, that takes out a good 1.25, 1.5 turns. We were also dropping at about 1% down here and dropped down to about 1.25, 1.5% there. And so in total, we've taken out a good 2 turns or so of the helix. And that was, what all of this was planned to do from the start. So it might have looked a little weird when you've seen the staggered bench work over here, although we haven't really done a whole lot on this side of the layout. But when I've kind of toured around with the camera before, this staggered bench work has always been hard to explain what was going on here. I've had it in my head being able to visualize how it was going to work out. And so this is pretty much what I had been going for. Well, you didn't need all the extra bench work in there. That's just kind of going to be dead space behind the mountain, and it's going to be covered by the base of the helix anyway, but that's fine. That's no great loss, and it's supporting this base here. So now hopefully it starts to make a little bit more sense why the bench work has always been staggered around here, and it's always been so that we can cut out time in the helix. Kind of talked about the helixes before. Love them, I hate them. They're kind of necessary on a multi-deck layout like here. On the other side, to get from the upper deck to the middle deck, I don't have any gradients really that takes it away, other than a very short approach section of about 8 feet as you come out onto the middle deck. Otherwise, I let the helix do all the work, but I was also only having to move about 10.5 inches or so between those decks, just because of the way the gradient was then working coming away. I did stagger the bench work a little bit too. Over here it was much greater distance. I think in total I would have had to move about 16 or 17 inches, which isn't terrible. I've seen helixes that move 24 to 30 inches or more. So not terrible, but I don't want the trains to be in the helix for 7, 8, 10 minutes at a time. So getting between the upper deck and the middle deck, I think we're in there for about 2.5 minutes, as it does 3.5 turns at 18-inch radius. Over here we're coming out to a 22, 23-inch radius. I think it's still going to calculate out to about 3.5 turns, although I need to check my math about the 4th time before I start building it. Be about the same number of turns, but a broader radius. I think we're going to be looking at more like 3.5 minutes. We'll see. And 3.5 minutes does start to get a long time in terms of a train being completely out of view. By the time you go into west portal of the Cascade Tunnel, round about here, and then by the time you would come out the east portal of the Cascade Tunnel, around about here, pretty much everything else is hidden inside, or will be eventually hidden inside mountains. And so 3.5 minutes or so is a long time to not be able to see your locomotive. So if you had to do another 2 rotations through the helix, then you do easily start getting into 5.5 minutes in the helix, and for me that's just a little bit too much. So I'm going to take a breather. I do have a couple more short support pieces to come in here, but otherwise quite happy with how the grade will come out from the flat on Leavenworth and gradually increase. And so by the time we get to about here, we're at that 1.5% all the way around. A little slow going, just because you got to keep adjusting. Didn't do video as I went through. Unfortunately, I kind of feel like I should have done, because this is like the last res section that I'm going to be doing, but it's the exact same process if we go a long way back to where I was doing all the res sections here for the Seattle stations, and over on the other side where I was starting to get the res section in for Inter Bay Yard. It's all using the same support structure, where we res it up on those 3.5, 4 inch or so strips of 1x3, screw them in, countersink the top, and then make sure that everything is leveled up, both in terms of the grade that you want that way, and also front to back that you have it level. And so it should run pretty smoothly. Like I say, we've been able to move the trains around on that middle deck, so that's cool. That's wired up. Next step, I think, will probably be just leave that and start to work on the helix. I'm not that concerned about getting track around, because it'll kind of be track to nowhere. I do also need to drop all the feeder wires in for the lower deck. If we come and hang out and look at some of the loops of wiring that we have, and I feel like I'm going to sneeze, I apologize. If we look at the loops of wires that we have around here, I still need to connect that into PM74. So none of the lower deck actually has any of the DCC bus live, so there's no point in starting to do that foam roadbed and then actually start putting track down. Helix, I think, is going to be next. Check the math and see if I can get all this built out. That's going to take a little while, and then make sure that I don't need to change too much here as well before I would start to do any track work. So a little bit of a whirlwind in terms of the videos. Kind of went from, hey, I need to build skyboards, to, hey, I've done almost 25 feet of 1.5% grade from Leavenworth all the way to the bottom of the helixes. But this has kind of put me in good stead. I knew that this helix was going to be a process, and I had to figure out the approaches on both sides really before I was able to get into doing the helix, because now I can pretty much calculate exactly what the height is that I need to be climbing and make sure that I get that right. I still need to have separation between the decks too, but I'm hoping that it can be a little bit of a shallower grade, more like 1.75%. 2% at the most. I'm hoping I can get away with. The other helix got a little bit too steep for my liking, although the trend still run through it just fine. So I'm going to call this one to an end, and then hopefully next time we come back we'll be looking at some progress on the helix. If I don't do a little bit about, just showing progress on the skyboards, because that's something that I can just do fairly short bursts of, in terms of go through, sand those, start to get the first coat of paint on, might come back and look at that. But the next main thing that's going to be going on is going to be this helix build. Then we can get trends down to the lower deck. So thanks for watching and following along. I'll be back whenever I can do. And yeah, hope you've enjoyed this one. Take care. Bye-bye.